learners, I am Dr. V. Venkatramanan, Faculty, School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University. Today, we will be discussing about environmental quality. The environmental quality is a set of properties and characteristics of the environment. In fact, it is a measure of the condition of an environment related to the requirements of one or more species and to any human for its well-being. This environmental quality includes air, water, soil and noise quality. The various standards that have been set by government, private and international agencies to monitor the quality and also to improve them when the limits are exceeded. The tools which are employed to manage the environmental quality are the environmental impact assessment and the environmental legislation. The environmental impact assessment is the formal process used to predict the environmental consequences, whether it is a positive or a negative, of any plan, policy, program or project prior to the decision to move forward with the proposed action. This environmental impact assessment is in fact a management tool for ensuring optimal use of natural resources for sustainable development. Initially, this environmental impact assessment was performed for river valley projects way back in 1978 to 79, and thereafter projects like the very mega projects like industrial projects, thermal power projects, mining projects were also covered. The guidelines have been evolved to collect the environmental data and for preparation of management plans. This EIA, that is Environmental Impact Assessment, has now been made mandatory under the legislation, environmental legislation like Environmental Protection Act 1986 for 29 categories of developmental activities, which involves investments more than 50 crores. This environmental impact assessment, the recent guidelines on environmental impact assessment was issued on 14th September 2006. Since then, the various developmental projects that have been recategorized into category A and category B depending on the threshold capacity and likely pollution potential requiring prior environmental clearance from the either the state government or Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change. The notification provided by the government and the competent authority provides for screening, scoping, public consultation and also appraisal of project proposals. There are certain phases in the environmental impact assessment process. The first and foremost important phase is the screening. In this particular stage, screening stage, all the projects, whatever the projects we are want to go for the EIA assessment, will be listing down, and thereafter those projects which have considerable environmental impacts are identified. Once we have identified, we will be going for the next step, that is called scoping stage. In this particular stage, that is scoping stage, we will be concerned with the issues and also impacts. At this stage, in fact, the scoping stage is very extensive because it includes consultations, discussions, experts' opinion, etc. And in fact, that is very important because we will come to know what exactly the impact of any project or a plan or a program. The scoping, the stage, it involves determination of assessment methods also. It provides an opportunity for the public involvement in determining the factors to be assessed, and also it facilitates an early agreement on contentious issues. So definitely it saves time and money. As far as the methodology is concerned, the tools are concerned, checklists, matrices and networks are widely used in this scoping exercise. When you look at the very important step, next is the data collection, the baseline data collection. In fact, what the baseline means is that it is the collection of background information on the biophysical settings, social settings, economic settings of the proposed project area. Basically this baseline data are obtained from the secondary sources. The baseline data we are talking about is collected for two main purposes. One is to provide a description of the current status and trends of environmental factors. When I mean the environmental factors, I am talking about the pollutant species, their concentration, so on and so forth. We will be concerned with the host area, against which we will be trying to talk about the predictions, and we will be trying to talk about the past and the present and the future. The predictions will be doing it, and how the project, the plan is going to affect, and for this reason the baseline data is essentially important. The second important purpose for going for baseline data collection is to provide a means of detecting the actual change, by monitoring once a project has been initiated. A kind of a change detection analysis is possible only when we have a baseline data. The next step in the EIA process is the impact analysis and prediction. Predicting the magnitude of development, likely impacts, the development oriented impacts, and evaluating their significance is the most important aspect of environmental assessment process. The prediction should be based on the available the data what we have talked about, is the baseline data, and such predictions can be either in the form of a quantitative terms or qualitative terms. The next step is the analysis of alternatives, because we need to look for the alternatives. Okay, so because the basic purpose is to minimize the impact of any action, human action particularly. This step, that is analysis of alternatives, it is done to establish the most environmentally sound and feasible one, financially feasible option for achieving the project objectives, and at the same time it should have a minimum impact on the environment. This analysis process requires a systematic comparison of the proposed investment design in terms of the site, the technology, the processes involved in the project, and also in terms of the impacts as well, and the feasibility, financial feasibility, socio-economic feasibility, and also the mitigation potential, the capital, the cost is also very equally important. When I talk about the cost, it includes the capital cost and also the recurrent cost, expenditure, and how this particular project or the alternatives are suitable for the local conditions, and whether it is having any support from the institutions, the training aspect, the capacity building aspect, and also the after the effects. When I say after effects, the monitoring requirements. So these all has to be taken into account in this particular step, that is analysis of alternatives. Next step is the mitigation and impact management. So when you talk about the mitigation, basically the mitigation is done to avoid or minimize the predicted adverse or negative impacts, and to incorporate the mitigation measures into an EMP, that is environmental management plan or a system. So in that way we will be reducing or minimizing the negative impacts. So the objectives of mitigation includes to find out the better alternatives and also the ways of doing it, ways of achieving it. The second important objective of the mitigation strategy is to enhance the environmental and social benefits of a project. That is the most significant aspect, because when you talk about the socio-economic and also the socio-environmental effects, so that in a nutshell it should benefit the society. The project what we are talking about, it should benefit the society, that is the bottom line. The next important objective of the mitigation is to avoid or minimize as much as possible the negative impacts. The last objective of mitigation is to ensure that the residual effects, adverse effects, are kept within the threshold level, or in other words the acceptable level. The next step is the environmental management plan, EMP. it is basically a detailed plan and also schedule of measures necessary to minimize any potential environmental impacts identified by the assessment, that is environmental impact assessment. This environmental impact or in other words the environmental management plan, it consists of a set of the mitigation strategies, the monitoring measures, institutional measures which are essentially to be taken during the implementation and also operation of the proposed project to eliminate what? To eliminate the negative environmental impacts. So, this environmental management plan should describe with clinical perfection or to describe with the technical details of each mitigation measures. So, this environmental management plan should also include the monitoring objective as well, and it should also provide a broad or a specific description of the institutions or institutional arrangements. That is essentially a very important aspect. So, this environmental management plan should include the cost aspect. When I say cost, the cost of the mitigation measures, the cost of the alternatives, or also the other related activities as well. The environmental management plan should consider the compensatory measures if mitigation measures are not feasible or not cost effective. So, the compensatory aspect is the most important highlight of environmental management plan. This environmental management plan must be operative throughout the whole project cycle. Next step is the environmental monitoring. This environmental monitoring is the systematic measurement of the indicators, the environmental indicators over a time period within the particular geographical area. So, this monitoring, environmental monitoring focuses on the significant impacts identified in the EIA process. So, the main types of monitoring activity are the baseline monitoring, impact monitoring, complaints monitoring. These are all the three important basically if you see the monitoring types. As we discussed the types of monitoring activity, the first and foremost the monitoring activity is the baseline monitoring. A survey should be conducted on basic environmental parameters in the proposed area, project area, before construction begins. So, that is what I was trying to talk about, the baseline data, how it is significant, and the basic purpose also I have mentioned. Then subsequent monitoring, once you have gone for the project, the subsequent monitoring also can assess the changes in those parameters over a time period. So, in a way I am talking about the change detection, and this baseline monitoring is essentially important for change detection. The second monitoring type is the impact monitoring. The biophysical the parameters and the socioeconomic parameters within the project area must be measured during the project construction and also operational phases also. The third monitoring, that is the complaints, that is the last one, complaints monitoring. The complaints monitoring employs periodic sampling method or continuous recording of specific environmental quality indicators or the pollution species or the pollution levels to ensure whether the project compliance, or in other words whether the project is complying with the recommended environmental protection standards. That is the most important objective of complaints monitoring. The next is the environmental impact statement. In fact, it is the final document, the environmental impact assessment report. It is a kind of a final document, and this environmental impact statement EIS is submitted to a designated authority for further scrutiny before taking any final decision. The competent authority together with the technical advice, the review, it will determine the quality of EIS and also gives an utmost opportunity to the public to comment upon the project, to comment upon the socioeconomic significance aspect and also the benefits. If the environmental impact statement is accepted and an EIA license is issued, and if otherwise, if it is not given, it can recommend for additional studies definitely before issuing this license, it can also recommend for additional studies, so that in clear terms we can know fully well that what kind of impact the proposed project will be having on the environment, on the people, on the lifestyle, and definitely on the society. Next important aspect, just what I'm talking about, since we are talking about the environmental quality, we have the tools. One is the environmental impact assessment, the other one is the law, environmental legislation. So as regards the environmental legislation, the most important legislation is the Environmental Protection Act, which was passed in the year 1986. In fact, the basic purpose of this act is to implement the decisions of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, which was held in the year 1972, or in other words, it's called as Stockholm Conference as well. So this legislation was designed to provide a basic framework for the central authority to coordinate the environmental related activities with the various departments, whether it is the central department or the state authorities. In fact, that has been established through environmental legislation that was passed before the Environmental Protection Act 1986, for instance the Water Act and the Air Act. So this legislation, Environmental Protection Act, was basically designed for what? To have a better coordination between the different departments, whether it's the central government or the state government. So the basic purpose is to have a better environment, better way of life for the people. So and that's the most significant aspect of this Environmental Protection Act 1986, and the year 1986 marks a significant development as far as the environmental awareness is concerned, because just 2 years back, that is in 1984, our country witnessed the Bhopal gas tragedy. In fact, this Environmental Protection Act, the emergency, the gravity of it, the main things, it has taken from that particular disaster, Bhopal gas disaster. The next important aspect for today's discussion is the environmental quality, how that is going to affect the human beings. When you talk about the environment, it directly affects the health status, and in fact it plays a very significant role in the quality of life and the way we live, and the health disparities, and also standard of living and life expectancy as well. The poor air quality is linked to premature death and disasters, and even the diseases like cancer, respiratory diseases, ailments, cardiovascular ailments. So this air pollution or poor air quality, as far as the human health is concerned, it has been documented beyond doubt that it is causing grave harm to the human health. In fact, globally, if you see, 25% of all deaths and the disease burden, total disease burden, can be attributed to the environmental factors. So as we discussed about the air quality, similar is the case with the water quality also. The poor water quality can lead to GI, that is gastrointestinal illness, and a range of other conditions, health conditions, including certain neurological problems as well. And the second related issue is the built environment. The built environment as well can also have an effect on the individual health and also the environmental quality. So what we aspire for is an environment free of any problems, free of hazards like the pollutants like carbon monoxide, the lead, the allergens, the toxic chemicals. So that's what we aspire for it, so that we can prevent the diseases and other related health problems. So implementing and enforcing standards, the environmental standards, regulations, and regular monitoring the pollution levels, the concentration levels and also the human exposures, the building environments, and healthy lifestyles, these all can improve the health and quality of human beings, and also the quality of the environment. In the context of quality of life, if we look at the environment, I'm talking about the human life, the environmental conditions affect the human health, well-being, as I said, directly it can through the pollution, air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, it can affect, and indirectly through the adverse impacts on the ecosystems, the biodiversity which we are dependent on, and even the natural disasters and industrial accidents. I mentioned about the Bhopal gas tragedy. It's that's industrial disaster, Chernobyl. So there are many are there. So what I wanted to say is that the environmental quality is dependent both from the natural perspective and also the human action perspective. These environmental factors indirectly affect the quality of life. When I say quality of life, it can influence the economic prosperity, inequality as well, economic inequality. So now we will discuss about the environmental quality from the perspective of the human impacts. The environmental degradation is a result of the dynamic interaction between the socio-economic activities, institutional activities, and also the technological developments. The environmental changes may be driven by many factors like economic growth, population growth, the urbanization, industrialization, in a way agricultural activity as well. And agricultural activity and industrial activity, I mean more use of the fossil fuels and transportation activity. These are all the factors that can lead to changes in the environment, and that changes, the negative changes that can lead to environmental degradation. Poverty breeds pollution. Poverty still remains a problem at the root of several environmental problems, and that can also lead to environmental degradation. So when you look at the factors, the first important factor is the social factor. When I talk about the social factor, I am talking about the population. Population is a major source of environmental degradation when it exceeds the threshold limits of support system, life support systems. The population impacts the environment primarily through the use of natural resources and waste generation. It is also related or associated with the environmental stresses like I said about the biodiversity loss and environmental pollution. So poverty is said to be both the cause and the effect of environmental degradation. In other words, poverty is having a kind of a two-way relationship between environmental degradation. So poverty alleviation can reduce the negative impact on the environment. The second important social factor is the urbanization. It is very well related with the population growth and population explosion. The rapid and unplanned expansion of cities has resulted in the degradation of urban environment. Urbanization has increased the gap between the demand and supply of the infrastructural services. Such as the housing, the transport services, energy, communication, education, the water services also, and whatnot, even the recreational activities, amenities. So this mismatch between the demand and the supply of infrastructural services can also lead to a lot of problems to the environment. So the result is what? Yes, the deterioration of the water quality, air quality, and waste generation, and you'll be finding a lot of shanties. I mean, I'm talking about the slums, proliferation of slums, and you'll be finding a lot of unwanted or undesirable land use changes that also in a way relate with urban poverty. The second important factor is the economic factor. It is equally important as far as the factors are concerned, like your social factor. So the environmental degradation is also said to be a result of market failure, a malfunctioning of the market system. So the lack of well-defined property rights also may be one of the reasons for market failure. So, and second related factor is the distortions in the market. The market distortions created by the price fluctuations, price controls, and subsidies may also aggravate the achievements of environmental objectives. So the level and pattern of economic development also can have an impact on the environment, in other words the environmental problems. The India's development objectives have consistently emphasized on the promotion of programs for economic growth and at the same time for the social welfare. The manufacturing technology adopted by most of the industries has placed heavy load, heavy pressure on the environment, especially through the intensive use of resources, natural resources, energy uses, and that has led to the environmental pollution, health hazards, and also the degradation of natural ecosystems. The next activity, when you talk about the economic activity, to everyone's mind, what it comes is the transport activity, because urbanization is related with the transport activity. This transport activity have a wide variety of effect on the environment, such as the environmental pollution. We know fully well the air pollution, that's the most significant symptom of transportation, and noise pollution also, and the oil spills. When you talk about the transportation, the sea lanes, marine shipping. So these are all the problems that we encounter because of the transport activity if we are not taking appropriate measures to mitigate the negative activities, negative actions. Yet another economic activity is in the farming activity. Intensive farming practices can also contribute to soil erosion, soil siltation, salinization, and also the loss of valuable soil nutrients. The third important factor is the institutional factors. When you talk about the institutional factors in our country, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the apex, it's an apex body. It's responsible for the protection, conservation and development of environment. The ministry, MOEFCC, it is works in very close coordination or in line with the other ministries, the state governments, other departments, even the pollution control boards, and even the academic institutions, universities and non-governmental organizations. It is in a active participation. It does so. The basic purpose is to have the best possible environmental quality in our country. The contributions of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is very significant as far as the maintenance of the environment is concerned. And when you talk about the ministry, and the simultaneous point is the key legislation, that is the same one, Environmental Protection Act 1986. In fact, it is a kind of an umbrella legislation, because it governs the how the functionalities, how the departments, the environmental department should act, how the pollution control board should act, and what kind of measures that need to be taken for environmental management, the strategies. So everything has been incorporated in this Environmental Protection Act 1986. Other important legislation as far as the environmental quality is concerned, the Forest Conservation Act 1980 and the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. See, these all are related with the environment. There are many, but the most significant is the Environmental Protection Act 1986. Perhaps the weakness of the existing system is the enforcement, the capabilities of the environmental institutions, both at the center and the center and the state level. So what is needed is an effective coordination among the various ministries, the departments, so that we will have a proper organic linkages. That's a basic need of the hour, basic necessity for achieving the best possible environment quality. The current policies are also fragmented across several government agencies with the differing policy mandates. And the next weakness is the lack of trained personnel and a comprehensive database. Also, that is also a weak point that we need to work upon. Next one is the institutional strengthening measures, the capacity building or training of the key professionals, staffing. These are also very important for achieving the best possible environmental quality. So to sum up, we have discussed about the environmental quality, and the tools employed to manage the environmental quality, namely the environmental impact assessment and the environmental legislation. So further, we have discussed the various stages or the phases involved in the environmental impact assessment process. We have also discussed the factors like social factors, the economic factors, the institutional factors responsible for deterioration of environmental quality. And we have also mentioned that how important the steps, we need to get rid of the weaknesses that is there in the every factor, that means institutional factors, how best we can bring in the coordination between the central government and the state government, how best we can bring in a kind of a linkages between all the possible departments, line departments. In that way, what will happen, the best possible way we can achieve the, the implementation aspect, the standards, the environmental law can be implemented as much as possible. So that's the key take-home message from this session. Thank you.